back a little bit. I was actually a head teacher before I became a teacher. I was working in a faith school. I helped establish it. I helped it got registered with Ofsted. And Peru, you won't believe it. We were approached by the Labour government at the time for me to actually start my own voluntary aided school with a significant amount of funding, because they wanted the faith representation, across the country. They wanted faith representation in
Yeah.
education, and we kind of qualified for that.
Yeah, I remember that. It's following I think the 2005 election. There was a manifesto commitment
Yep.
by the Labour government, and the then Education Secretary Alan Johnson made a commitment to, and there was an argument that you've got other faith groups that have voluntary aided schools, that state-funded faith schools, the Jewish community, the Roman Catholic community, obviously the Church of England, and there's a few evangelical Christian schools out there as well. So to equalize it, they made a commitment to basically fund voluntary aided faith schools, and
Yep.
it was Alan Johnson who was leading it. So people who know Labour politics know where Alan Johnson is. He's not exactly a friend of Jeremy Corbyn, but he actually led it. So it just shows where we were at that time to where you are now. So it's kind of like your journey actually basically shows that how public discourse has changed towards minority communities in general, and also the Muslim community, and it's come to a fore with the Black Lives Matter situation, a movement, in the sense that there's a much more awareness that instead of us as a country moving forward on these issues, in fact, the reality is we've moved backwards. And I think the Trojan horse affair is a classic example of that how much race relations, community relations between public institutions and the communities they serve has basically deteriorated. And, the Trojan horse affair was in Birmingham, but you see similar kind of rumblings in East London as well. It's not come to the forefront, but when you speak to people, there seems to be a discourse that things have actually gone backwards, things have not gone forward. We're not getting, when it comes to schools and educations, we're not getting head teachers reflecting the pupil population that they educate. We're not seeing school governing boards reflect the population, student population that they educate. And it's not just on a racial line or a faith perspective, but it's a class perspective as well, where you have schools that are supposed to serve working class communities, but if you look at the people who make decisions in the schools, they're not from those working class communities, or don't have an understanding of those communities, and decisions are made, etc. And that's probably one of the reasons why education achievements are quite low in certain areas, because the decision makers don't. But obviously you basically got involved, and all the schools that you were involved were outstanding schools. So you started off in Luton, and then you became a teacher of a famous, I think secondary boys school, isn't it? In Luton.
No, So
That's
I was
the
in.
comprehensive one. The state one was the secondary boys one.
Yeah, so I was in Luton, and I left the faith sector simply because I wanted to go into mainstream, and exactly for the reasons that you've just mentioned. There wasn't enough representation, and I firmly know I don't need an academic or a professor or any research to tell me that being a key stakeholder, you are very influential to your local community, to the young community. When they see Bangladeshi and young Pakistani, and when they see young West Indian, educated professionals in various fields, it's actually an internally motivating force. It's a subliminal, it's a very difficult way to express how I'm trying to justify what I'm trying to say, but it has such a resonance in the mind that it motivates you, it pushes you, it encourages you. You can somehow beat those barriers and climb those obstacles around you. So that's the kind of, that's where I was, and that's what I wanted to be. It wasn't for the money. I'm a chemist. I'm a well, I'm quite, well-able individual. I could have gone on and made a very nice, lucrative career out of doing a lot, in the chemistry sector, but I don't think that would have lasted long anyway. Yeah, I'm sure that
I'm sure they'd
I'm
find
sure
something.
I'm sure I would have disappeared or into some kind of black hole and forgotten about and found my skeleton 1,000 years later.
Yeah,
And
it's crazy. It is what it is. But I do understand that children need positive role models. So I was on a governing board of school where they had behavior management issues, and then we looked at that none of the teachers reflected the student population. So we had an active recruitment policy of getting teachers from the communities that are reflected, and lo and behold, the behavior management issues were kind of like went away because the children could actually relate to the teachers and they
yeah,
become a positive role model. And sometimes a lot of the behavior management issues or the attainment issues are because children need a vision that this is what you can become. Especially when you're growing up in poverty, where mum and dad are not working, or dad is not working full time, or mum isn't working full time, and so you need some kind of positive role model saying if you do well at school, this is what you can become, and it does make a
yeah.
world of a difference. So you were in Luton, you're teaching at a state comprehensive. You're progressing in your career. Then how did you
So
end up in Birmingham?
so
Apart from driving up
yeah,
the M1.
yeah. Well, what had happened is, well, in actual fact, you won't believe this, but while I was in the faith schools, I actually became a school improvement consultant. So you won't believe this. While I was teaching in Luton, in a school of the year, a massive state school, well-known state school, an outstanding state school, phenomenal outcomes, really good results, very similar to the Parkview schools that was implicated wrongfully in the Trojan horse, which I'll come to in a minute. So on the one end, I've got my career here, and on the other end, simultaneously, I'm a school improvement consultant. So I'm advising mainly faith schools around the country on how to improve, how to, become Ofsted approved, Ofsted registered, how to get out of special measures. So I was doing a lot of that, believe it or not, outside of my 9 to 5 teaching job. So that would often mean, Puru, you won't believe this, but finishing work at 4 o'clock, going home, having a cup of tea, getting my laptop ready, and then driving up the M1 to Manchester, to Birmingham, down to London, across the country, helping schools out of school hours, meeting with trustees, governors, head teachers, teachers, and various other educational bodies, to improve their schools or the educational settings. And it was amazing because I'll tell you the blessings of that and where that led me. So 2006, I become a teacher. I'm working good about 3 years now in the state sector. In 2009, for various personal reasons, me and my wife, we just decided that for my children, namely, to go to Leicester. So we migrated to Leicester, which is, to my parents, it's like, on the other side of the world.
Leicester
But
Sharif, as they say.
it's yeah, Leicester Sharif. So
Yeah.
and so it's only an hour up the well, if the way I drive, it's about an hour up the motorway. So um, I was actually, it was a privilege, it was an honor, because I ended up working, and like you mentioned, I ended up working at Madani High School, which is a voluntary aided school,
Yeah.
and they became,
I
I
think they
ended up
were
working
one of
there.
the first Muslim schools to be
Yeah,
voluntary
the
aided.
first purpose-built Muslim school in
Yeah.
Europe, and it was funded and by the government. And what's remarkable is I became the head of maths there. So I went from being a lead of science, into becoming a head of maths, middle management position. So, and we did remarkably well in my first year. I think we got one of the highest results in the entire country. My results were like in the 80s. A stars to C grades, in maths. And that was almost unheard of. The second year was the same, so third year again, the results were phenomenal. And remarkably, while I was in Leicester, my kind of, what's remarkable is my knowledge of school improvement was growing at a remarkable rate. So I was going around the country, I still continued this educational, and it wasn't like a consultancy, Peru. It was almost voluntary basis. A school would be in trouble. I'd go through the Ofsted report. They'd contact me. I'd go through the Ofsted report. And what was remarkable, Peru, that I had met the most honorable non-Muslims on my journey that even till this day, I have a loving relationship with. And these kind of relationships, the way they precipitated and the way they crystallized, it was always for the betterment of the community or the children that we were looking to serve. So while I was in Leicester, I was continuing my school improvement work, and I came across some really tough cases, like really politically sensitive ones as well. And I'll come to one really famous one, which which I'm sure you'll know about. It was splashed all over the press, the news, the media, and I'll come to that in a minute. So I continued in education. I stayed in education. I stayed in middle management. I had a great opportunity in Leicester in some of the schools to go into senior management. But Peru, I didn't. For me, Birmingham and Luton attracted me. Yeah, because there's a variety of ethnic groups in Birmingham that reflect the discourse of Luton. So,
Yeah.
and I liked working with this. I
So
liked working with the Somali. Go on.
I'm gonna come in here. So basically, our viewers in London don't understand the issues outside of London. So outside of London, like places like Luton or Bedford I grew up, and Jahangir just down the road in Luton, is very segregated.
Very.
It's very segregated. So they're like, you can't go. Like when I was growing up, we couldn't go into certain areas or we get beaten up. So basically, it's very segregated towns, and that's reflected or in towns outside of London, especially to the north of London, where you have large minority communities, but they're basically pushed into very segregated areas, and there's
Yep.
policies, etc. We could talk about that make sure that those minority communities stay in those segregated areas. And the understanding is, when I was growing up, that we're supposed to do the jobs that no one else wants to do.
Yep.
And then what I found when I was growing up is certain jobs are barred. You never told why you didn't get the job. You could be
Yeah.
qualified for it, but you're never told why you didn't get the job. So the only jobs that people got was either hospitality,
Yep.
hospitality, night shifts in the factory,
Yep.
night shifts when no one else wanted to do the night shifts, and
Yep.
cabbing. That's it. So those were the only sectors where it was acceptable for minority communities to be employed in. And I still remember that we got this newspaper in Bedford called the Bedfordshire
Yep.
on Sunday, and they had this racist piece where they basically said, um, like minority communities should be satisfied with the jobs that they have, like cabbing and restaurants, and they shouldn't expect more. And that's the kind of
Yeah.
article I grew up
Wow.
as a child.
Wow.
This is the editorial of the local newspaper. So that's
Yeah.
the kind of thing. So I know London, we're multicultural and everyone's like hip, and outside of London it's a different world, and that's the kind of world that me and Jahangir come from, and that's what he's talking about.
2013, sorry, I became a deputy head of Old No Academy, and very successful. We're doing very well. The results are outstanding. The school results are outstanding. We're outstanding in everything. We've been approached. The governing body, outstanding governing body, heavily, highly educated individuals, very talented. Head teacher, and me and her, Bipinda Kondal, we got on phenomenally well. There's a great amount of synergy between us two. I was the deputy, she was the substantive head teacher. We got on really well we got on really well. You won't believe what happened now. the governing body decided that they wanted a free school. So I had a lot of experience with free schools. I decided that I was going to, so one of my given responsibilities as part of being a deputy head. Puru, you've got to remember, this is Birmingham, this is Small Heath, where in some of the schools at that time, 35 to 40% was the accepted rate of A star to C GCSE grades, including English and maths. And that was terrible because the national average was only.
Michael Gove came with an agenda where he wanted,
Yep.
I think it's based on the Swedish model.
Yep.
You had the conservatives in Sweden. I think they introduced a school voucher system, giving parents choice, etc. So obviously, when it first came out, it gave people choice. It gave schools flexibility in terms of curriculum, and it, on the face of it, and again the jury's out because there's other studies, it drove up educational attainment. So what you had was areas where you had low educational attainments in Sweden. So Sweden, like the UK, has a very large migrant community. I think the issues are much starker over there due to the history of Sweden and language and culture. It just recently became a sort of like a country that accepts migrants, whereas the UK has had a much longer history, hundreds of years of migration of migrant communities. So what they saw in their study was if people were allowed to set up their own schools and parents are given vouchers, what that did was that drove schools to compete with each other and drove up educational attainment. So Michael Gove, he saw the Swedish model. This is his argument, that he wanted to drive up educational attainment. The teachers' unions have a different understanding, that what Michael Gove wanted to do was break up the teachers' unions, the power that the teachers' unions have, and the powers that local authorities have over education, because he saw that as a bastion of left-wing indoctrination. So he brought the free school agenda and academy agenda in to basically break up their monopoly. So hence he pushed the free school and the academy agenda and encouraged a lot of. So in Tower Hamlets we do have academies. So there's one called London East Academy, which again has a Muslim principal. So I think a lot of minority communities and faith groups saw that as an opportunity to basically come into the education sector to put choices. So we have similar things in Tower Hamlets, and I presume you had that in Birmingham and other areas with large ethnic minority. Just one moment.
We applied for it. We were personally approached by the DFE, and these are things I've never disclosed publicly. Go for it. So we met. Let's do, and you know this is scary, Puru. Let's do a questionnaire and a survey in the school. So we did a parent survey, we did a staff survey, we did a staff confidential survey, we did a pupil survey. I got really worried. I thought, here's a big, overgrown, husky, male, British, Pakistani Muslim with a massive unkempt beard, wearing these Ted Baker and Paul Smith suits, trying to look good, trying to be a wannabe model, right? I thought, shit, you know what? They're not going to like me. They're going to, there's going to be bad reviews, bad, disclosures. There's going to be bad feedback, negative feedback. Puru, you won't believe it. 97% plus parents said, we love the way Jahangir is leading the school, and we love the way he's taking. We thoroughly approve the way Jahangir is now running the school. The staff survey, Trojan horse hits the headlines February, 4 weeks later, Puru, 4 to 6 weeks later.
So that's February 2014.
January 2013, I become acting principal. We pull out surveys, parents, pupils, teachers, governors. Governors are highly, highly approving and very praiseworthy of my approach to the school. They're very, alhamdulillah, they praise me a lot. They've congratulated me. The staff survey revealed almost I think every member of staff in their confidential survey said, we like Jahangir's attitude, we like what he's doing, we support his leadership, we would like him to remain the way he's doing it. In other words, they loved my leadership. Yeah, let's cut the bullshit out. Let's just say it as it is. You know, I don't want to be a conservative Muslim and shy away from the praise now. Let's just say it how it is. If we want to look in the corporate world and we want to look at KPIs, well, it's all looking good for me. If my KPI was parent attitude, that's a tick. If my KPI, my key performance indicator was attitude of staff, that's a tick. If my KPI, measurement was the attitude, people's attitudes towards myself, that's a tick. If my KPI, if one of those was, how do the governors perceive me, that was a tick. So I'm breezing through my KPIs, believe it or not. I'm doing very, very well. What happens now? Oh my goodness. In other words,
I totally get it. I find it interesting that it was around that same time that Gilligan was active in Tower Hamlets as well. So you may know that.
Right.
Yeah, because 2014 was when we had elections. So Tower Hamlet had the first executive ethnic minority Muslim mayor in 2010. And he was up for election in 2014, and those same journalists writing about it, and you had the same themes, like it was a Muslimic takeover of a public authority. They were making decisions that favored one community over another. There were accusations against him of having dual loyalties, those kind of stuff. So it's kind of interesting that at the same time Trojan Horse kicked off in Birmingham, and you have the same themes of dual loyalty, secret agenda. We need to, anybody of a minority Muslim background in a position of authority is seen with suspicion, and they need to be controlled. And I just find that interesting that the same people that were involved in, and what is fascinating is, just like Trojan Horse was found to be a hoax, he's been, although the court found him guilty on the electoral stuff, all the other allegations were unfounded, and the police opened up an investigation, and they couldn't find any evidence. That's what it is. So but he's been tried in the media. He's been trashed in the media. I'll be honest with you, I'm a Labour Party councillor. I never voted for the guy. So that's from a political point of view, we don't agree. But what I'm saying is, it's interesting that he's a guy is similar to Trojan Horse in the sense that he was trashed in the media. So even now, you go on the doorstep, they think he's a crook. People think he's a crook. He's a crook. But yet, after multiple investigations, there's nothing there. But the damage has already been done. And that's what I find fascinating here with Trojan Horses. If you talk to Joe Public, they think something's happened there. There was a secret plot to take over schools in Birmingham that got stopped. The way it was trailed in the media, the way action was taken, yet nothing happened. That's it. And no one reads the subsequent articles or studies showing that people are innocent. And I think that's the issue in terms of the security agenda, is that it's not rational. Instead of treating acts of criminality as acts of criminality, what's happening is that entire communities are seen as suspect. They're tried in the media before due process is done. So even when they're found innocent, the damage has been done. So people's lives have fallen apart. You can't get jobs. Anybody do a Google search. So it's and I've seen it in politics as well, where politicians of Muslim background are held to a higher standard. So whole allegations. So there's a councillor colleague of mine where they said, the Daily Mail wrote that he said that attack, Salisbury attack, was a fake or something like that. He never ever made a comment on that. Well, there's a whole
Yeah, yeah,
Daily Mail article on him saying that calling him an anti-Semite, and
yeah, yeah,
and he never did none of that, you know. So you see the same pattern, and it just feeds into that. And I find it worrying in the sense that in Tower Hamlets we've got the Shamima Begum case, where even before she's landed to the UK, she's guilty.
yeah,
So they trailed her off. This is a girl who was groomed, is a victim. You know, any other circumstance, it would be a victim of child abuse, because
yeah,
she, before the age of consent, she was groomed online. She comes from a sort of like a semi-broken family, advantage taken at that age. She's groomed. She's taken over there, forced to marry someone below the age of consent. So under any circumstances, she's a victim of child abuse. That's what we would define it as. But yet she's tried the, you know, her citizenship stripped, even though they couldn't strip her citizenship. And now she's coming back. So I'm finding that the same patterns over and over again, where you got, you know, Trojan horse was a hoax, but the damage has been done, and the entire community has been criminalized, stigmatized, people's lives have been destroyed. And it just, so we need to basically have a much more rational debate about how we deal with these issues, especially the prevent agenda, and how we basically get people to buy in. And it has a much more nuanced thing, you know, and we need to call it, because at the moment it's premised on a very racist presumption
yeah,
that the Muslim community is guilty of dual loyalty. I don't know who we're loyal to. Do you know what I mean? Of dual loyalty. So even if you have a Muslim in a public position, they got their own agenda. That's what it is.
yeah.
Yeah, he's a head teacher, but you've got to watch out for him. He's got his own
Yeah,
agenda. He's pushing
that's
his
right.
own agenda. He must be
That's
pushing his own
right.
agenda, you know, instead of saying, hang on a minute, like, and it's conspiracy theory, because what it is you
Yeah,
go with the most rational explanation, Occam's razor in philosophy, you know, you go with the
yeah,
simplest explanation, and then if it doesn't hold, then you go for a more complicated one. You know,
that's
but when
right.
it comes to Muslims in this context, everybody's jumping for the most complicated explanation
That's
rather than
right.
a simple one. The guy must have got out of bed, you know, wrong, or, you know,
Yeah,
let's look at the situation in the assembly of children being left out. That's what the issue is. Instead, there's always a jump to the most complicated explanation of it. Is there's some kind of conspiracy? You know, there's
yeah,
a conspiracy. There's a secret committee trying to control and change the schools and basically take over society. And I find that very troubling, because it's happened, and it happened in history as well. This is not a one-off. It's happened in history with Irish Catholics in this country. It was
yeah,
illegal to be an Irish Catholic. You couldn't get into certain jobs. You couldn't be a lawyer. You couldn't go to university if you were an Irish
yeah,
Catholic. You know, so you know, like, if these guys are put in positions of power, you know, they're going to take over England, and they have a dual loyalty to the Pope. You know, and they'll turn
yeah,
this
yeah,
country to Catholic. So I find it very interesting that 200 years later, so 200 years ago, they passed a law in Parliament saying it's okay for you to be a Roman Catholic. And then we had the first official churches open and first official Catholic schools open in this country after it became legal to be a Catholic in England. That 200 years later, we have the same issues of with now it's the Muslim community, you know, like, it's literally, they have dual loyalty. They have, and it's kind of interesting that in the Lutful Rahman case, they used the 100-year-old law that was used against Irish Catholics,
yeah,
used against Muslims, spiritual influence, like, as if, you know,
yeah,
that Irish Catholics, that if the priest tells them to do something, they go out and do it, you know. So I find it very fascinating that you've got the same patterns, etc. And it's going to be interesting in Tower Hamlets how the Shamima Begum case rolls out. So obviously, I'm a local councillor, so I'm pushing it at a local council level that has the council fulfilled its obligation, duty of care, and that's what it is, that the state or public institution have a duty of care towards you. Your teaching union has a duty of care towards you. the local authority, Birmingham City Council, has a duty of care towards you. The school governors have a duty of care. It seems like what's happened is those duty of cares have been overridden, and this complicated conspiracy theory security agenda has overridden the duty of care, and people are just left out to dry, and their lives are being destroyed. That's what it is. And I find it weird. I find it fascinating that people are more, these rational people, decision makers, instead of looking at issues of poverty, deprivation, the simplest thing on the doorstep, like a lot of people are unemployed there, the incomes are low. That's probably why they go with the complicated theory instead of some international conspiracy of little people in little rooms controlling things. I just find that. But that's, and I think the reason why is, if they deal with the real issue of poverty and deprivation, then they have to deal with real issues. That's what it is. You have to do changes. But if you go with conspiracy theory, you don't have to change practices or anything. You could go away with the inequality in our economic system and not do anything about it. And what it is it's to do with an agenda of criminalizing poverty and not allowing people to talk about issues of poverty. That's what I find. So Trojan horse is what you had inner city schools that have been abandoned, and we had the same issues in Tower Hamlets. You had the change in school leadership, improving those schools, and that was seen as because that's counter narrative. Because what that does is say, hang on a minute, if these schools were improved now, what was happening 20 years? Why were these children left behind? Who's going to take responsibility for kids dropping out and going to prison? Who's going to take responsibility for that? So there's loads of issues there, and it's really important that that, because so do you want to just talk about what happened with you?
And everybody has got to hate the new monster. So what happened was in February, March 2014, we were employed in Trojan Horse. And then in April 2014, Parkview, Nansen, Golden Hill, Old Mill Academy, and I think about another 24 schools across the country. I think there's 21 schools across the country anyway, were inspected by the EFA, which is the Education Funding Agency, and Ofsted. And we were subsequently, as we knew it was happening anyway, it was going to happen, we were put into special measures. So our leadership was downgraded to special measures. Our behavior and safeguarding and welfare was downgraded to special measures. Why? Because apparently we didn't have a prevent kind of policy, even though at the time it was only optional, right? But yet we stayed outstanding in teaching and learning, and yet we remained outstanding in achievement. So that's how, and then, April 2014, that's where really Old Mill Academy was brought out into the public. Andrew Gilligan was reporting
that April 2018.
2014.
2014, okay.
Yeah, just a few months later. So as soon as Andrew Gilligan started reporting,
that's when things are kicking off in Tower Hamlets as well. So if you in April 2014 or April 2014, a Panorama program came out on Tower Hamlets, and you had the same journalists involved in Trojan Horse claiming the mayor, the guy was up to no good, kind of ish.
Yeah.
Recording is on.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, so thanks, Jahangir. So we're continuing our discussion. So where we left off was you had the raid, the FBI raid, or the feds come in from the, but instead of the FBI, you had the EFA, the Educational Funding Authority. So about 9 of them turned up to sort of like raid the school. So tell me about that experience, and then and forward. So we're you know your school gets raided by the government.
So in April 2014, the last week of the Easter term,
Mhm.
the Ofsted came in and conducted a no notice inspection.
Yeah.
And
Can you explain what
during,
no notice one is? Don't they have to give you like the day before that they're coming in?
yeah, they do, but that's all it is. It's literally like a day before a
Mhm.
call, or maybe the weekend before that. Look, we're coming in on Monday. We're going to carry an inspection. They don't really give out the reasons, but
And
obviously
that's triggered off by a complaint. That's my understanding.
that was a series of 20. Old No Academy was a series of 21 schools in Birmingham
Mhm.
that were being investigated
Understood.
because of the Trojan horse because of the allegations made in the Trojan horse hoax. So
You know what is interesting is at the same time we had schools in tower hamlets as well. So that's interesting. But that's a side point because I remember someone calling me. But yeah, g- um, carry on. Sorry.
so in so we had Ofsted inspect the school
Mhm.
over a 2-day period, and it was very clear that things weren't right with the inspection. We didn't like the way the inspection was conducted. We did make a formal complaint. And what was shocking that we went from outstanding and we were downgraded, you know, to special measures. But what was so profound that the behavior of the children throughout the inspection was exemplary. The teaching and learning was so consistent that everything was outstanding. They looked at the results and the data that they had at the time, the limited data they had at the time, because it's a few weeks before SATs.
Mhm.
They said the achievement was outstanding, but they said that the leadership and the governance was not so, and because that is inadequate, then the whole school has to go into special
Yeah.
measures. So
So you have
what
to
I
give a
did,
plan, don't you? Well, as to how
well,
you're gonna
no,
come out of it. No,
well,
it doesn't work like that.
that wasn't the that I wasn't worried about that, because as you know, I've worked with
Mhm.
many schools that have been rated as inadequate or non-compliant or deemed in special measures. What was shocking is the reason why they downgraded us is that because they stated that we weren't abiding by, or we didn't take into consideration the prevent policy and certain aspects of it, but it wasn't mandatory for schools, so especially for primary schools.
Mhm.
So anyway, we were downgraded very unfairly, and you can imagine the shock to the system, because Parkview has been inadequate, Nansen's gone into inadequate. Parkview's been put into special measures. Nansen Primary School. Under Parkview, they had a few schools that were under their Monty Academy Trust. So they were all downgraded to special measures. We were also downgraded to special measures. Now, what's shocking is how can you just a few months before be rated as outstanding, and then all of a sudden, literally 13, 14 months later, you're inadequate? And Puru, and I know it takes years and years of commitment and dedication and sacrifice for a school to be outstanding. So 2 days later, so that was the first 2 days of that week in April. We then get a phone call from the EFA, the Education Funding Agency. They fund and regulate all the academies, and every academy has a funding agreement, and you are obliged as directors and as trustees to oblige and to comply with that funding agreement, and which I'll talk about the particulars and the bizarre construction of these um, funding agreements at a later time. But the EFA then announced that they were going to conduct a 2-day inspection, and these were the last 2 days of school before we broke up for the Easter break. And what was shocking was about 9, 10 of them walked into the school, and they obviously were investigating. Well, what is absolutely shocking is that their terms of reference were never clear. Yeah, they were never clear. You know, have you come to investigate the Trojan horse? Are you looking at the allegations in that Trojan horse letter, etc., etc.? So they came in, they looked at the curriculum, they looked at various aspects of the school makeup. And can I just go back actually? On the second day of the Ofsted inspection, white teachers, non-Caucasian, white, non-Muslim teachers came to my office, and they came to my office and they saw me slumped in my chair, like very exhausted mentally. Don't forget, I'm traveling 500 miles a week. I'm there 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock in the morning during the Trojan horse, and I'm leaving 12 hours later. So they came in, majority of them were white females, and in a very nice way. Honestly, I was so I was so rejuvenated after that meeting. But one thing that was very paramount and very clear, and they stated quite boldly that Jahangir, they're not here to conduct an inspection. They're only here for the Muslim staff. So the Ofsted inspectors were asking the young girls very inappropriate questions. Are you allowed to wear the hijab? You know, what do you think of the male teachers? You know, are you forced to pray? You know, there were certain questions that were being levied at the young children without the knowledge of the leadership team um, and other teachers. But then again, some of the teachers were questioned, and that's how it got back to me. But I remember those group of teachers. Not only did they feel sorry for me, I can see the pain in their face because they were outstanding practitioners. And when you professionally develop people, you develop a very emotional bond with them because you're developing their career, their lives, their futures, because they're going to have an impact on the on the younger generation. So they were so like demotivated. They were so down and so it's like there's no words to describe what we were going through in those few moments, but it was very clear, and it manifested at the end of the day, at the end of that Ofsted inspection, that and these are the words of my non-Muslim colleagues, they were after Muslims. This was not a normal inspection. We've been inspected several times before. Something's not right here.
Okay.
Anyway,
so just to move on, the conclusion was that you eventually get suspended. Who suspends you, just out of interest?
Well, okay, so what happens from there, Puru? Before we get to that, one of the things in the Ofsted report, they stated that the governors were trying to promote a narrow ideology. But let's put this into context. They didn't give an example of what they meant. You know, what do you mean by narrow ideology? Can I just say something very important? We didn't have any Salafi governors on the governing board. Everybody.
Okay, I'm going to explain to thingy. So
go on then.
Yeah. So so just
before you answer that,
yeah.
I'll give you the opportunity. Right, there was a mixture of several backgrounds, so there were governors who had various interpretations of Islam. So I'm not saying anything about the Salafi, movement or brothers or anything of the sort, but what I'm trying to allude to is that everybody was from a different makeup. So, which was really, so nobody had a particular, we're not going to have music, we're not going to have art, we're not going to have,
So even though the governorship was of a Muslim makeup, it was sort of like a wide theological base. So it was like ecumenical. So it wasn't so like a narrow interpretation. It was the widest because obviously everybody has to get along with everyone. So you go with the lowest common denominator in terms of agreement, which basically means you've got a wide interpretation of the Muslim faith or the needs of the Muslim children in the school, as opposed to if the governorship was made out of a single denomination, Muslim denomination, just like a Christian denomination, then you would have had a narrow interpretation of what the needs of the children are. So I just want to explain that to our viewers. But carry on.
Yeah, so you can understand if, like you said, if the governors were collectively following a very narrow or very restricted, or a very different or a very bizarre understanding of Islam, but that was not the case at all. Never was I instructed by any governor, reduce, promote Islam, promote the prayers, promote, Eid over Diwali or over, Christmas or over Easter. Don't teach music, don't do the drawing of eyes. There was none of that. That's just bizarre. That's just a myth. That's just false. That's
So
misinformation.
those are the allegations that were made against you in the school.
Well,
Yeah.
in actual fact, believe it or not, well, okay, I'll come to that in a minute. So a lot of those allegations, Peru, they actually appeared in the what is now known as the infamous Peter Clark investigation. So can I move on? So what had happened is so it was quite worrying that Ofsted, without producing any documentary or evidence to state that the governors were trying to promote a narrow ideology, I think they only spoke to one or two governors, and that was very briefly, and that wasn't even in detail. 2 days later, after the Ofsted inspection, which was a bizarre and a very surreal event, very unorthodox, by the way, very, very unorthodox. In the 2 days, Ofsted being there, they very rarely spoke to me. Imagine that I'm the leader of the school, and they very rarely came back to me. What they were looking for, they were looking for members of staff that could kind of promote or vouch for their kind of perverse findings. Anyway, so a day later, we get a knock on the door, and the EFA have turned up. Their terms of reference were, we're going to investigate. We're going to review the curriculum, review your decision, review your funding agreement, the conditions in the funding agreement. Are you abiding by them? And obviously, there's a lot of financial due diligence that they've got to conduct and review and assess, etc., etc. Now, that was the most bizarre inspection, and I think that resonated across all the schools that were inspected by the EFA. And a lot of the EFA inspectors during the NCTL trials were deemed as not credible and not reliable witnesses. Anyway, so
Cool. So after
the
that
EFA,
inspection, you got suspended.
well,
How
the EFA came in. Well, what happened, Peru? The EFA came in, and the EFA report was really shocking, because now you had an Ofsted report. Now you had you had an Ofsted inspection, you had an Ofsted report. Then you had an EFA inspection, you had an EFA report. The EFA inspection was really bizarre. They put things in there that were never corroborated, and I'll come back to this later on, Peru, because you'll be really shocked. However, during the EFA inspections, two or three things happened that were really, really bizarre. Number one inspector actually looked into our personal files, which are very, very private and very confidential. They were given by a member of that school. They were given access to our school personal records that are highly confidential, right? Number two, they asked certain Muslims, they they made certain statements in their report that had no bearing on anything. And there was one particular incident, Peru, which was really shocking, and which I will touch base later on. I think if you can remind me, because honestly, it will show you how bad and how unethically some of the inspectors behaved in that inspection. So the EFA inspection gets report. The EFA report gets published. Now, in the background, I didn't know this, but the Peter Clark investigation was running. Yeah. Now, I was never part of that investigation. I was never interviewed by him. I was never asked for an interview. I was never called for an interview. I was never asked to contribute in any capacity. That report in June 2016 was also, in 2014, was also released. So you have the Ofsted report, the EFA report, the Kershaw report, the Peter Clark report, all published around June 2014. What happened after the reports were published? We had to put an action plan in place. to remedy some of the findings that they found, even though we didn't agree with the majority of them. The staff didn't agree with them. The parents didn't. In fact, the parents, I think in the Ofsted inspection, the Ofsted inspectors met 50 parents, and they were very, very upset at the Ofsted inspectors, and they really told the Ofsted inspectors off. They put the Ofsted inspectors in their place. Again, with the EFA inspection, they met with the parents, and against the same outcome. The parents were very, very upset at the EFA for bringing the school into, disrepute, behaving in this particular manner. So what happened now, Puru, was that we put an action plan in place. So we obviously submitted these action plans to Lord Nash. We submitted an action plan to Ofsted, and it was going really well. I met with the EFA inspectors several occasions during the EFA inspection and post EFA inspection. Very cordial with myself. They never put any allegations to me. Then can I say something very important, Puru? They never blamed me for anything. Could you imagine? I've got a direct, I've got their phone numbers. We're speaking on the phone. We're meeting here and there. So I was quite shocked when certain allegations turned up on my doorstep.
So basically, in the Ofsted inspection, you're not held responsible. In the EFA inspection, you're not held responsible.
No.
Then in the Peter Clark report, you're held responsible. So Peter Clark is someone who's commissioned by Michael Gove, the then Education Secretary, who's known to have sort of like what people would call controversial political views, especially when it comes to protective characteristics. He is known to be what's called a neocon, someone with people who believe you need to bomb to create peace in the world. But they also have this sort of like good versus evil kind of attitude towards national security issues. So he's the education secretary. He commissions Peter Clark, who I believe has links to the security services, to basically look into the Trojan horse affair and write a report. And so my understanding is Peter Clark wrote a report who basically names you.
I don't think he named me.
But what Peter Clark did recommend is that every single teacher in the schools named in the Trojan horse affair, which was later found to be a hoax. So this is like an allegation which later found to be a hoax. You had two government bodies inspecting. They didn't find any individuals to be responsible for anything. Then you have this third individual commissioned by the education secretary, who does not come from an education background, as far as I know. Now he's working in the prison service. He's come in and he writes a report for the Secretary of State for Education, where he recommends that every teacher is referred to the regulatory body for investigation. And on the basis of that, you get suspended, and your case is referred to the regulatory body for teachers. Is that correct?
Approved. But basically, can I just clarify a few points? Number one, I wasn't mentioned in the Peter Clark report. There were references made to myself, but I wasn't named. I wasn't ever interviewed. I wasn't ever called to contribute. Number two, I wasn't. Anyway, I'll come back to my suspension. So the Peter Clark report is published, and you won't believe this. That was in June 2014. The governors resigned a few weeks later, because there was pressure on them that if you don't resign, we're going to withhold funding from the school, which would cause a lot more problems. So a new governing body or a new set of trustees are appointed. The chair of governors was a very good chap, really got well with myself, understood the Trojan horse situation really well. And then in October 2014, now this is bizarre, Puru. it's almost a year, you can say, since, well, it's been a good few months now since the reports have been published. Everyone's had a summer holiday, new trustees are appointed. And then we had another inspection in October 2014 by the same person that led the April 2014 inspection, right? The same EFA officer. And after that inspection in October, I was suspended from work. And that was it. That was my last day at work. I never went back to education. I never went back to that school. Those allegations, by the way, I was suspended not because of the Peter Clark report. The Peter Clark report had no bearing on my suspension. The EFA report had no bearing on my suspension. The Ofsted report had no bearing on my suspension. These were just three wild allegations, which I can't legally state here. And, however, the outcome wasn't, it is what it was. I'm legally bound not to disclose the outcome of that. But, anyway, that was October 2014. That suspension and the ongoing inquiry went on for some time. But in December 2014, Puru, I received a letter from the Secretary, well, on behalf of the Secretary of State, Nicky Morgan, that because of the Trojan horse, I am going to be, i.e., referred. Now, these are my words, blanket referred to my regulatory body to see whether there's a case for a disciplinary against myself, which then transpired a year later in December 2016, December 2015. And that's when I was subsequently banned from education. I was barred indefinitely for 5 years, which I think comes to an end at the end of this year. So what happened so we had the Ofsted inspection, Ofsted report, EFA inspection, EFA report. There's a Kershaw report. I was never part of that. There's a Peter Clark led inquiry investigation report. I was not part of that. For those reasons, the governing body have resigned. I've obviously been suspended a few months later in October 2014. Nothing to do with any of these reports, nothing to do with the allegation in those reports, nothing of the sort. You would have assumed with the new trustee and new governing body that they would have looked at these reports and suspended me pending further investigation, Peru, right? I mean, that's what.
So,
that's
so
what any
do you want to
Peru.
talk about? Let's move on to the regulatory. So this wasn't, you weren't before referred to the courts for a criminal act or other. You weren't referred to the court. There wasn't a civil litigation against you for, say, breach of contract or breach of duty of care. What this was a referral to the teachers' regulatory body. So just like other professions, like solicitors, etc., teachers are regulated. This is the first time I've heard of this. So there's a teachers' regulatory body. The recommendation of the Peter Clark report is that everyone who's involved, any teachers involved in these schools, be referred to that regulatory body. The Secretary of State for Education, who's now Nicky Morgan, accepts that recommendation. She refers everyone to the regulatory body, and now you've got your case there. Now, who was representing you? I presume your teachers' union. Was representing you. But so were you part of the NUT, which represents most teachers, or which teachers union were you part of?
I was part of the NAHT, and they
Association of Head Teachers.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So they represented me via barrister at the hearing, which lasted, I think, for about 2 weeks. I think I can't really. I don't really think about it. I'm just trying to put it behind me. But the case, I think my bundle was about 1,000 pages in the end. Prior to that, I submitted a 250-page report to my barrister, who concluded that you did not, and I used it, and my union, that you did not Islamicize Old No Academy. In fact, you reduced it. These were their words. So anyway, so at the hearing, which took place in Birmingham, I was subsequently, certain allegations were put towards myself. Some of the allegations were not upheld. Some of them were dropped throughout the hearing, but subsequently, bizarrely and wrongfully, is a miscarriage of justice. I was they found they upheld most of the allegations against myself. They
So,
cherry
so,
picked.
so I just want to give the context to the viewers. So you're having this in 2015, late 2015. In
Yeah,
2017, it's conclusively held that the Trojan horse thing was a complete hoax.
yeah,
So basically, you got convicted on allegations that were later found to be untrue.
yeah,
Just by a regulatory body. So the regulatory body, I presume, would not work on beyond reasonable doubt. They would work on, say, balance of probability.
yeah,
And again, they wouldn't have followed the same jurisprudence as, say, a court will, or they
yeah,
wouldn't follow the laws of evidence that a court will follow. It's a regulatory body. They could look into evidence outside, I understand,
yeah,
which is presented. They could go on a fishing expedition. They could do a Google search, come to their own conclusion. Whereas
yeah,
a judge in a court would just have to look at the evidence presented. They're not
yeah.
allowed to consider any evidence outside that's presented. That's so it's a different kind of thing. So
There's a lower threshold of evidence as well, and there is a
so,
strong.
so they could admit hearsay evidence. So my understanding is that in a regulatory hearing, because it's civil proceedings,
Yeah,
you could have hearsay. So you could have, and what hearsay evidence is, I heard it from so and so that
yeah,
Jahangir was up to no good.
yeah,
Whereas in a normal court of law, that would be inadmissible. Someone has to be a direct witness to it. It
yeah,
can't be I heard from so and so, or for example Peter Clark. So any evidence presented by Peter Clark would not be used in a court of law. That's what it is, because it's all hearsay. He heard it from someone else.
Well,
You need to have the direct witnesses, etc.
yeah.
To basically so because of that, you're basically convicted on not convicted. The regulatory body found you in breach of the
Yeah.
regulation on allegations that later are found to be untrue. So why didn't you appeal it? Why didn't you take
So,
it to the court? What happened there?
so during the hearing, what I realized was that there was a lot of, like you said, Puru, there was honestly inadmissible evidence. There was a lot of reliance on hearsay. And what I found very bizarre is they had access to my whole email. They had access to my entire email account. So what they just did, they just cherry picked the emails that fitted. So if there was a conversation of 30 emails, what they took was 6, 7 emails, and that was it. They took out the emails, of the other recipients. The conversation was uncontextual. The emails were uncontextual. Oh my goodness, Jahangir said this. Jahangir said, no Christmas celebrations. Or well, hold on, that was never the case. Why don't you look at the email afterwards or the email before? So, and Peru, can I just make it very clear here? Some of these allegations that were levied at me, I was a deputy head at the time, not the head teacher.
So
So I am
you're not responsible.
I'm not responsible legally. This is
You're not
Peru.
yeah. So you don't have to
Yeah, when there's an officer inspection, they don't name the deputy head as the head teacher. When there's an EFA report, they don't name the deputy head as the head teacher. So
and the head teacher of the school was a person from a non-Muslim community. So
so were the other deputy heads.
it wouldn't fit into the narrative. So
Yeah, it wouldn't.
So here you're being held responsible for an issue where you don't have any standing, locus standi.
Yeah.
That's the legal thing. So for someone to be held responsible, or to bring a complaint, they need to have a standing on the issue. And ultimately, the named responsible person for a school is the head teacher or the governing body, not anyone else. That they have corporate responsibility. So just like in the council, the named responsible person would be the CEO or the mayor. So any legal action would basically have them named as a corporate responsible person for the council. I won't be responsible, or nor any other officer, so I can't be held accountable for council decisions, although some people try to sometimes. So that's how it is, because there's no standing. So you get, they find you, regulatory body finds you guilty, finds you in breach of regulations on hearsay evidence and on matters that you don't have any standing. Then my understanding is they're not able to appeal it because the union basically removed their funding, and you have to basically.
So I was a litigative person. So, but could I also add about the hearing, Puru, that it was based on very cherry-picked emails, cherry-picked evidence. There was a lot of what's the word? Exculpatory evidence that I had.
Do you want to talk about Teacher X, because Teacher X's case exemplifies the kangaroo nature, alleged kangaroo nature. I'm going to say alleged. Kangaroo nature of this regulatory hearing. So do you want to go through what Teacher X? Let's call it Teacher X. What happened with his hearing?
Teacher X and me were supposed to be at the same hearing at the same time with the similar allegations, right?
Yeah.
I think all the Trojan horse, all the teachers that were referred to the NCTL, the common allegation between all of us was that we tried to narrow the curriculum, right? Mm-hmm. They're not saying, they're trying to say that we narrowed it because we're Muslim, but they didn't go that way. But the insinuations, the behavior, the way they came across, they're trying to say that because we're Muslim, we're trying to narrow the curriculum. Hand on my heart, I never narrowed the curriculum. I never asked the majority of my staff were in responsibility were non-Muslim. I never instructed anybody to do anything of the sort. Can I just also say that I wasn't the only deputy head. There were also two other non-Muslim deputy heads at the school at the time as well. And it's just a shame that I'm the only one that's happened to be sitting in front of a panel. Now, Teacher X and me, we received similar allegations. Some of them that we don't draw eyes, we don't listen to music, we try to, it's like we're wearing earbuds or something,
Sorry, man. I just find that hilarious. You know what it is? You know why I find it hilarious? Because I've had similar allegations labeled against me in politics. Right. And it's people who don't like me, and I confronted the guy. I go, look, why are you spreading stuff about me? And the guy smiled, and he did it mischievously. So there's a guy who's not would I say an authority on Islam. Basically was spreading stuff about me, and it was malicious. But it's a similar kind of allegations that you were saying, which I find. Sorry, I just want to say I just find it hilarious, and everybody who knows me will find those hilarious as well. But it just shows how easy it is to sort of like slander people of the Muslim faith.
So there was a particular situation during the Efa inspection in 2014 where Teacher X came into a room and the interview.
Sorry, I know Teacher X, so I'm just imagining him at the moment.
So, and believe it or not, Teacher X, very intelligent, very able individual. Very capable, honestly, a very good future in education, very sound mind. Anyway, this particular individual, and this particular teacher, he was a kind of individual where, anyway, so he was called for an interview by the EFA, like a lot of us were, a lot of us asked our views on homosexuality. You know, a lot of us were. I mean, they must have thought we had a Sharia court in Old No Academy, where we were just sitting at the top, just writing fatwas against everyone. You know, so. But what happened was the Muslim civil servant. He said to the inspector like this, and I don't know if you can see me. He nudged her like this, and he said to her, "Shake his hand." Right?
God, yeah.
You know where this is going,
Yeah.
right? And it's in the EFA report, and I think in the Peter Clark report, one of those. Anyway, so the EFA inspector, she gets up and she puts her hand out like this, Puru. She puts her hand out like this, and he goes, "Look, I don't shake hands with women," right? But she kept doing it.
Teacher X said that.
Teacher X, right? Teacher X. This was well known about Teacher X.
Yeah.
Teacher X was employed well before I started that school. So Teacher X had laid down his guidelines.
Yeah.
They were completely accepted by the governing body and by the leadership team of the school.
Yeah.
He had just passed his NQT. He was flying through that. He done exceptionally well. He was an outstanding teacher. He was an outstanding practitioner. Anyway, so you've got to understand, he's being set up now. He's actually being set up. So she gets up and she puts her hand out, and he says, "Look, out of respect, I don't, shake hands of the opposite gender, out of respect and out of my observance to
let me explain to the viewers what that is. So it's not because Teacher X or that person thinks women are lesser human beings or something like that.
Yeah.
What it is he comes from a conservative background where they believe that any relationship with a person has to be within the context of marriage, and what they define relationship as physical touch, any physical touch. So that's what it is. That's what it is. So he comes from that kind of background. So obviously, different Muslims have different interpretation. Not all Muslims adhere to that. So you will find Muslims that do shake women's hands. But he's taken that interpretation that any relationship has to be within the context of marriage, and what he defines relationship as is any physical touch. So that's his sort of, and that, but that's not, but that's his interpretation. But there are many interpretations in the Muslim community. So you will, I shake women's hands. I don't. So that's my interpretation. But I just want to explain that. So sorry, I just wanted to explain that. Fire away.
So Puru, could you imagine? Now this isn't a normal situation. You're kind of coercing, or you're putting somebody in a very difficult situation here. So so she puts her hands out repeatedly. He refuses, and she then interprets that
sounds like
in
sketch.
In like a malicious manner, and this was tried to use, and then this. So, but can I just say something very important? Nobody knows this. This was never disclosed. This only came out in our hearings. Mm-hmm. In fact, this came out in the cross-examination and the confession of the EFA inspector herself under oath. I'm telling you, I don't care if they found us guilty. Yeah. What did they found us guilty on? Rubbish, hearsay, stupid, uncontextual crap. It was a miscarriage of justice.
Teacher X didn't want to shake.
Yeah, so
it could be that he's got, it could be various reasons. Sorry, I'm just I find it hilarious. God.
So could you imagine? Now, can I also say something very important here, Puru? This is really Puru, did you watch that play, the Trojan horse play?
No. I heard about it. And but
honestly, if you ever get an opportunity, Helen Monks and I think Matt Woodhead are the directors, and oh my goodness, you've got to watch it. I watched it about 4 or 5 times. Brilliant.
Is there a link? I'll check out on YouTube, and what I'll do, I'll put the link out with this video. So if anybody wants to watch that.
It was stunning. They had a tour across the whole country. They won several awards, well recognized. And anyway, so the same inspector in the Park View School went into a music room. I know this inspector, she wrote that there's no music and that music is not promoted at Parkview. Now, the music thing, can I just say something very important here? It's all baseless, right? At Old No Academy, we had a music teacher, you know. You know what I mean? So, you know, and do you know what's really shocking? In my hearing, the prosecution witness came and she said, no, Jahangir promoted this, Jahangir did this, and then they stopped the hearing. And then I came back the next day. It was adjourned. The next day they came back and the allegation of music and reducing art was dropped. You know, it is bizarre, Puru. It's so bizarre. Anyway, this inspector, in cross-examination at the Parkview case, she stated in her, oh, by the way, she was a co-author to the Peter Clark report,
So
right?
yeah.
So she carries.
She's not an inspector. She's not an independent inspector. Then is
So she carries a considerable authority, as you can imagine, right? As a leader, as a co-author, right? So this particular inspector, she, and this comes from the Trojan.
Let me give you context to this. So Peter Clark is a guy with alleged neocon views. I say alleged. So what it is he doesn't seem to come from a pure educational background. He did a stint at the Charity Commission. He did a stint as in the education, and now he's gone off to the prison service, where he recommends. It's alleged. I need to sort of verify it, but he's recommending that Muslims in prison be isolated. You know, they should be isolated, just because they're dangerous. You know, like because they talk to other prisoners, and then other prisoners become Muslims. You know, so yeah. So his recommendation is that Muslims have their own wings, just like in it seems like in Northern Ireland, where Republicans had their own wings. So I think if his recommendations go ahead, we'll have sort of like equivalents of the Maze prison, where we have entire blocks just full of Muslims and they don't have any interaction with other prisoners. But go on, fire away.
Yeah. So this particular inspector, she stated in the report that Parkview School don't teach or don't have any musical instruments or don't do music to that effect, right?
Yeah.
This was in the play. This was in the play. So in the cross-examination, one of the barristers asked her that, did you go to the back of the music room and open the music cupboard? And she said no. So the barrister said, well, if you'd opened it, you'd have found the whole room laden with music instruments. But that was being presented. Her position was there's no music at the school. And that position was being readily accepted by the panel and those that were pro Trojan horse. But there was so much evidence contrary to their findings, even against me, against all the other 20, 30 of us that were referred. So it's really bizarre because we had two cases in court that were overturned, by the High Court. So,
why couldn't you take you couldn't take your case to the High Court because the union wouldn't fund it. The NA National Association of Head Teachers, they wouldn't fund it. So if you had to take it to the High Court, you have to take it from your own pocket. But this is in a situation where you've been suspended. You don't have an income. So on the basis of that, you would if you want to appeal it, you have to take it. Whereas the other guys, they could take it to the High Court because they had the backing of their teaching union to do that. But you, I think you were the only person that was represented by the NAHT. I don't think anybody else was. Everybody else who was referred was a normal teacher, whereas you, because you were an acting head, you were a member of the NAHT. So other teaching unions, they decided to appeal. Their guys won, whereas your teaching union didn't. And the NHHT is the Association of Head Teachers. So you probably were one of the few minority community head teachers they are. So this is just generally statistics that school heads don't normally reflect the school population. So it's probably might be one of the reasons why they didn't do the appeal, whereas the other teaching unions are much more representative. They went ahead. That might be the reason why. I'm just speculating. So
I
did
think
it? Mm.
they had their reasons, but nonetheless, I was litigant in person, and I tried the appeal. I did manage to get an appeal. I was successful in getting an appeal, but unfortunately,
You have
when
to
you're a
come.
public servant, you don't make as much money as you think you do. So
Tell me about
you
it.
realize, so you realize that when barristers and QCs are going to cost between 250 and £1,500 an hour, you're like, right, okay, but unfortunately, I decided, due to my health, family commitments, and because I lost all my money by then, I decided that I'm just gonna, just carry on and fight it on another day.
So
And I'm still,
did you get picked up by the media? I know you've.
I mean,
What
I
about
didn't get.
there were articles by Peter Oborn. So the one that I shared recently was an article by Peter Oborn, and Peter. We both know Peter. Peter is when he spoke to you, I believe he was then the political editor of the Daily Mail. But Peter has extensively written about discrimination the Muslim community faces. I know he did a Channel 4 Dispatches program as well. So do you want to explain your conversation with Peter and what Peter said to you about it?
So I did have a discussion. So Peter Oborn, I mean, lovely chap, honestly, absolutely brilliant individual. I think what it is, Puru, what I've realized, when a person is at the end of a grave injustice, a great or grave miscarriage of justice, you need people to listen to you with an open ear,
Mm.
with an open heart, and with a lot of kind of intelligence. And Peter Oborn, to me, he came across as a very deep and wise individual. Like, honestly, this guy was, you can just tell from his position, the way he spoke to me, he was really well read, phenomenal journalist. So he was just devastated. He was, like, really shocked when I gave him some of the more finer details as to what had happened, how it got to the hearing, what had happened at my hearing. There were some particular events which, for legal reasons, I can't declare here, but that, for the public that are listening, you will find it shocking, honestly. And Peru, I'm going to say something very important here. I'm willing to give my redacted statement to anybody that wants it. Anybody that wants my redacted statement, they can have it. And if anybody wants to put questions to me, wants to interview me, wants to go through the NCTL report, there's a
So
public report about my ban on the
so
internet. You can
so
read it, and it's there, and I can rebut the whole thing.
so
So Peter Clark, Peter Oborn,
what I'll do is with this video, I've got a website. I can put your redacted statement up or anything else you want people to
yeah,
see, and put the links
please.
up, and then with the video, people could just click, and it's everything is there. But
Yeah.
fire away. So what was Peter's
So
words to
Peter's
you?
response was that there was a grave injustice. The Muslim community was targeted. It was a shambles. It was a hoax. There was a great level of, miscarriage of justice here. It was very unfair. And I think you and many others, Pete Oborn included, many recognize that there's no accountability. No one's holding these MPs account. Nobody's holding the senior individuals in the whole certain organizations to account. So Peter Oborn's very clear that we were targeted wrongfully, and it was a very, very bad stain in the history of this country, especially for Muslims. So now, for me, I think, I think what Peter Oborn did for me was he did enough for me to pick up my life and carry on. Honestly, he did. And I don't care if you know me. I'm going to tell you straight. I did nothing wrong. If I did anything wrong, I'll put my hand up. But I had witnesses at the hearing that lied. They actually in a when I was suspended at that disciplinary hearing, witness D stated something very contrary to the cross-examination hearing at the NCTL hearing, and it wasn't picked up. It was, that would be you would become an admissible witness in a normal court of law straight away because you've given two conflicting accounts, and both accounts with no basis. And witness D, was absolutely, this witness, she lied through her teeth,
So
and so going forward, I think with Peter Oborne and what he did, he was the only, I think, first or possibly the second person I ever spoke about my entire case.
mhm.
And I think I think I've spoken to another academic, another professor, and I think you're the third person, Puru. You're the third person I've ever spoken this much detail. And I understand that between you and me, we understand each other, we know each other, well enough to, but I can say to you as a friend, as a brother, as a person who's trying to be devil's advocate here, that I did nothing wrong, hand on my heart.
I think for me, what it is for me, I see parallels in Tower Hamlets with the Shamima Begum case. So two things that I find quite troubling is the concept of citizenship. So each of us, by the very nature of us being born in this land, have certain liberties and certain rights as citizens. What seems to be in the case of the Trojan horse case, with your case, with Shamima Begum, and just generally with the Prevent agenda, is you have a racialized concept of citizenship. So yeah, all of us have British passports, but some of are more equal than others, and that judgment is done on the basis of racial stereotype and prejudice. So that's one thing I find disconcerting, is that basic concept of equality under the law is not applied in this case. The second thing what I find disconcerting is a two-tier justice system, where basically there's a justice system for everybody else, but then we have different justice system when it comes to Muslims. So so with your situation, you had hearsay evidence admitted. You were found to be breach of regulations
Yeah.
and banned on the basis of a hoax, which something was later on, 2 years after it was found to be a hoax. But there's no redress to that. There's no even apology or anything like that. That's
No.
it. Let's move on. Case done. Any other situation, they would have reopened the case. So it's a classic miscarriage of justice, where you
Well,
have evidence. So you've had cases in America where they've had DNA evidence now, and basically found this person's not totally to be innocent, and they overturn the convictions. Whereas in this case, it's like, move on, guys.
and
It's not an issue. So that's what I find disconcerting, and I think it's generally what the Prevent agenda, as it is now doing, is basically what, in effect, what it's doing is saying is saying that citizenship is based on race. That's what it is ultimately. That certain communities are suspects; they're not real citizens. And then because of that premise, you have a two-tier justice system. So it's not just justice in sort of like the legal sense or in the court sense, and we have that in terms of the trials, that you have like certain cases, your lawyer can't see the evidence. You know what I mean? But it's also the way public justice is also in the way that public institutions adjudicate as well. So we don't just go to the courts for adjudication. We go to public institutions for adjudication. So in your case, it's a regulatory body. In the case of Shamim Begum, it was the local authority. And those cases are adjudicated differently, not on the basis of fact, but on the basis of whether someone is from the Muslim community or not. And what I find disconcerting is there's parallels to way Irish Catholics were treated in Northern Ireland and in the UK during the times of the Troubles. We all grew up when the IRA were blowing stuff up all over the place. But the way they were treated, so it seems like there seems to be a repeated pattern of you criminalize an entire community for whatever political purposes that needs to be thinking, and so that's what it is, and that's what I find disconcerting about the prevent agenda. And I don't think people. When I talk to people about the prevent agenda as a Muslim, you go, yeah, it's human rights. And they don't understand that how destructive it is to people's lives. So imagine, you're innocent, you haven't done nothing wrong, but just by the solely basis that you come from a certain faith community, you're convicted. You're guilty. You're guilty until you could prove your innocence. That's what it is. So people are coming in, assuming you're guilty. They're looking for evidence to match it up. So it's not an investigation; it becomes a witch hunt, in the sense that someone's a witch, and well, we need to prove that they're a witch. So what it is, we gather evidence, testimonies to prove that they're a witch. We basically, that's what it is. It becomes a witch hunt. It's not an investigation. That's what it is, and there's a really good I know there's a Trojan horse play, but there's a really good play called The Crucible, which talks about the Salem witch hunt. It was at the same time that they were doing the communist McCarthyism, where they were hunting out communists in America, and he wrote it as a matter of protest. So you have that. What it is, I found similar parallel things in the Labour Party, where entire hamlets, it's not like I don't have to go far. I had colleagues that were accused of certain things because they were Muslims, and they were found to be innocent, of in particular. And like, if you're a Muslim politician, then you must be anti-Semitic. Like, what? Like, what? You need evidence, don't you? And both of them were found to be innocent. There were allegations made about them in the press. They were found to be innocent, but they've been trashed. That's what it is. Like, I've had newspapers come after me as well on baseless allegations, and I robustly defended it, and they didn't print. They didn't go to print with those allegations. But it just seems like it's prevalent that because you're a member of a certain community, you're guilty until proven innocent. And it's not just Muslim community. You see that in the traveller community as well. The way people write about the traveller community, etc. as well. They're all criminals. They're all criminals.
I mean, Puru, can I interject here? Professor John Homewood, he's written a book called Countering Extremism in British Schools. And in that book, he's one of the first few academics that has actually refuted it, and written a whole book on the hoax. Now, and it's definitely worth a read. But can I just talk about the Jewish community for a minute? Before World War II, the Jewish community was dehumanized. Peru. They were seen with suspicion. They were seen as the less important individual. They were seen as the outsider coming in. They were seen as people who we should be feared of, who are not good for us. And because of that, it almost became the DNA of the Nazis. And then they had some kind of they then used that as a platform, as a kind of a given license. Oh, we can do whatever we want to the Jewish community.
I just want to comment. Hannah, there's a philosopher, Hannah Arendt, who's written a lot about this. She wrote a book on modern day anti-Semitism, but she wrote a book on totalitarianism as well. And what she said was fascism is the alliance between the elite and the mob, about the misuse of history to stop the progress of history. So in this
Agreed.
context, what I mean is, what you have is there's a certain direction our country is taking, which is basically multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-faith. What it is certain powerful people in power, let's say, don't agree with that. They have a concept of
Yeah.
Britain, which is white, which is Christian, or they would say Judeo-Christian, but they don't count, even though Islam is part of the Abrahamic faith, they don't count Islam as part of being the European tradition, even though from the concept of inception of Islam, Muslims had a presence in Europe, either in Spain or in Italy, and then later on in Eastern Europe. They don't consider Muslims as being part of Europe. So because of the direction, what they're doing is you have an alliance between the elite, and then they whip up this mob rule of anti-immigration, people taking over, to basically try to reverse that. So what they come out with is there's this concept of Englishness of Britain, which has always been free of immigrants. But if you look at the historical fact, nearly everybody in Britain, either their ancestor came on a plane or a boat to this
Yeah.
island. That's the nature of this island. And and it had multiple migrations, from the Romans to the Vikings,
Yeah.
to the royal family, which were originally French and then German. It's kind of our royal family's German, it's kind of, but they believe in this concept of a Britain that doesn't exist. We constantly had migrations, we constantly had people bringing new traditions, etc. East London is a famous example. First, you had French migrants come in, Huguenots, French Protestants. Then you had the Jewish community. Now you have the Bangladeshi and Somali community coming in, and it has that history of migration.
Yeah.
And the towns we grew up in have a history of migration as well. But so they have a false history, and that's what it is. It's basically, it's on the first step to the road to a fascist state. That's what it is. And that's what I find frightening, is how easy it is to demonize a particular community. In this
Yeah,
case,
yeah.
it's a Muslim community, but you see that with other communities, that like the traveler community or the Afro-Caribbean community. There's different ways of demonizing. So we're seen as terrorists. The traveler community is seen as crooks. The Afro-Caribbean community is seen as violent gangs. So you see that this narrative of basically demonizing communities, so they're not part of this history, this false history, but they're seen as lesser citizens as well. And the way public institutions act, they're treated as lesser citizens, and you have a two-tier justice system where one rule is applied for the majority community and a different rules apply to the minority community. And I could imagine your frustration, but we see that, like everybody talks about Black Lives Matter. I was surprised, certain people jumping on, certain people who don't, who have the power to do certain things. They don't do that, but instead they wear a t-shirt and say, yeah, I'm against racism. But what are you doing on your daily basis when you have the power to do this? You're sitting on your hands and twiddling your thumb. That's what it is. So actions speak louder than words. So it is something that we need to aware of. I really appreciate you speaking about your personal experience, and with this video we're going to have links to that, but it's part of a wider discussion, because we need to have that discussion as to, if there are injustices, if there are, so it's to both communities and collectively as a whole, we have injustices taking place. What are we going to do about it? That's what it is. How do we affect change? How do we make people aware of these injustices, and what are the changes we could bring in? So for example, we could bring in through our councils could adopt their own prevent agenda. They don't have to go with the government guidelines. So that's one thing. Schools could adopt their own policies as well. They don't have to go with the government guidelines, as long as they're meeting the outcomes, and that's fine. So what it is we need to have a greater awareness, and we need to work to basically make people aware of the outcomes of this harmful policy that's doing, which basically criminalizes large sections of our community and creates a two-tier justice system when it comes to public institutions. But yeah, is there
I think
anything final you want to say, advice from your experience to anyone watching this?
I think there's a great level of inequity that is crystallizing across various public policy and various departments. And when you start to dehumanize and you start to see others in a very suspicious way, and I think that can cause a great amount of disunity in a country like ours. So we're born and raised here. We're highly educated individuals.
I think there is hope. If you look at history, there's always hope. There's good people that stand up, and
Yeah,
sometimes you need sacrifice. So one of the example is when Cromwell was going to go out and massacre the Irish, there were people in his own army that
yeah,
refused to go and refused to fight, saying it's unjust. You know what you're doing. You're going to massacre women and children, and they were executed. You know, they stood up
yeah,
and said, "We're not going to fight. We're not going to fight."
yeah,
So he had to execute large sections of his own army because they
yeah,
saw what it was. It was injustice, and you see that throughout the history of this country. Good people, come up and stand up and make the sacrifices to change the laws, and they're not necessarily from the communities that are being oppressed. And it's those kind of alliances that we can make, and it's happened in the past, and it could happen, but there's no reason why it can't happen now. But yeah, it's not all doom
and I
and
think
gloom.
yeah, and I think unless we address it and unless we get onto the same platform and voice and be in a position to hold people accountable in the Trojan horse, I'm sorry, it's unacceptable to demonize an entire community. You've disrupted the lives of thousands and thousands and thousands of young children. You've denied them opportunity and potential because you've removed stakeholders, you've removed role models, you've removed community representatives. So what you've done is you've disempowered, you've disenfranchised the whole community. But I'll say something very important. You know, I never lose hope, Peru. I never do. The NCTL did me wrong, and I will always, always, find a way for justice. And I'm going to get it. I don't care. Somebody told me that there's always a solution to every problem. And I was told this by somebody who is a very senior minister of religion and internationally well renowned, and he said something remarkable. He said, never give up hope. And he said that for all the difficulties and for whatever you've gone through, Jahangir, God will always and find other graces and other opportunities and other good things for you. So my thing is that we should highlight what happened at the Trojan horse. We need an investigation. We need a public inquiry. I'm up for it. I don't want to debate. This is not a matter of debate, Peru. This is a matter of us telling the world what happened. We don't need a debate to hear about the Birmingham Six and that Paddy Hill was in prison for 17 years. There is no debate there. The question is, how was somebody put away for 17 years? Why didn't it take the judiciary or something or someone to say, right, this guy's wrong, out he goes. There's no DNA, there's no evidence, even though they knew that he wasn't guilty, but let's just put him away because we've got to find someone or we've got to put him away. So, and in the case of Shamima Begum, I think it's very unnerving that the foreign secretary, or the home secretary can make such a statement and such a bold move that you would deny your own citizen the right to a fair trial.
It's illegal under international law as well. You can't make someone
It's
stateless.
illegal, but let's keep the international aside. How is it possible a country that espouses that the lead of the leaders in democracy, right? Yet here you have a child that was groomed, but because she's Muslim and because she's brown or because she belongs to the Bangladeshi community, no, she can't be groomed. She's all of a sudden a girl under the age, under marital age, under, has been forced, has been groomed online, and is being denied natural justice. I was denied natural justice. Paddy Hill was denied natural justice. There's a significant part of the Windrush community were denied justice. In fact, they were denied belonging. Forget justice. The Windrush, scandal. In other words, what are we saying? Because you're of a different color, because you're of a different background, you don't fit in. You're not allowed to be. You're not allowed to have access to equality. Is that what we're saying? Are you telling me, Puru, in our 40s, that this is where the country is right now? Where Black lives, we have to throw slogan, Black Lives Matter, where our Black brothers and sisters are being persecuted, and, Shamima Begum cannot come back to her country. Yeah, bring her back, give her a trial, let's hear it out. But really, should it get to that? Here's a case, a girl's been groomed, a girl has been harmed, she's been psychologically harmed, she's lost children, she's been in a very dangerous, very difficult situation, but the Home Secretary doesn't have any remorse for that. He doesn't want to bring a great British citizen, of this country back for some kind of support, some kind of, assistance, or put her through the judiciary. So the question is, why are we being denied these opportunities? Why are we being denied natural justice, Peru? Why? Why in the 21st century has it come to this? Now, if you take me out of the equation, I had 16 years of experience in education. I can access a very difficult part of my community where my Caucasian colleagues cannot. So when you take me out of the equation, you lose access to a community, Peru. If I remove your councillorship and I put somebody else there,
Plenty of people want to do that, by the way.
Don't worry, they're not going to succeed.
I've got 2 years, guys. So
they're not going to succeed. They're not going to succeed, Peru. So the way I see it, Peru, if they removed you from that councillorship, and inshallah, they won't, and they put somebody else there, how does that person really make an impact for the high makeup Bangladeshi community in East London or the other minority communities? So we have a very significant role to play. My advice is to everybody, number one, take ownership of this country. This is my country. I love it. Yeah, I might not be proud of certain things of the country. It's like having a family member and they've done something wrong. You love them, but you might not be proud of them for what they've done. So this is our country. Take ownership, take possession, contribute constructively as much as you can. Be part of the debate, flag situations, flag injustices. Number two, I would say that taking ownership is community participation. Participate in your local communities as much as possible. Number three, I would say get into politics, support the politicians. We're at a very a dangerous junction in politics at the minute. We've seen a wave of change of attitudes, and so I think it's important that our engagement is constructive and it's positive. And number four, I'm going to be very honest, be confident in who you are. If you're Muslim, if you're British, however you identify yourself, respect each other and be proud of what you stand for. And we should support those others for whatever they stand for. That's the great position in our religion, is that we are not anti-tolerant. We are not, people that marginalize anyone. We have respect for everybody. So, and I think, and finally, and I would say that we protect the judiciary as much as possible from any political interference. Also, people of power should be held responsible. We need a public inquiry into why Shamina Begum was denied justice. We need a public inquiry why the Trojan horse. Do you know? I think one of the cases in excess of £1 million it cost of taxpayers' money. So a hoax that has created so much public expenditure where that money could have been diverted to many of the deprived wards in Birmingham, in East London, in parts of Luton, in parts of Manchester, in parts of Liverpool. But it's unacceptable that there's been no inquiry, no one to be held account. So I do want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, Puru, for reaching out and for hearing my side. Obviously, there's a lot of details, and for the terms of reference of this discussion and this podcast that we couldn't go into. But I think when you read my statement, I think it will ring alarm bells. Just like Paddy Hill was completely innocent, of the bombings, of the bombings that he was alleged to have done. I'm innocent. I've got nothing to hide from anybody. Anybody who knows me, I've got a very good understanding in Luton. I've got a great, with my community there. I've got a very good understanding of community in Leicester, in Birmingham. So Alhamdulillah, I did nothing wrong, got nothing to hide. And yeah, I will get my justice, bro. Inshallah,
Definitely not. Don't worry. We're gonna rock it, man. That's it, inshallah.
Yeah, inshallah, So, but yeah, thank you for reaching out. Thank you for
it's cool, man.
Just hearing me out, man. It's important because we've got to remain cordial and professional. And however look, I've lost everything. I did lose everything, but you know what? In fact, I might have lost everything according to the way the world perceives it, but I've gained a lot as well. I've gained a lot, and I'm grateful for what I have. So, and we just carry on. We plod along. New opportunities are there, and we just take it from there. But people like you make a big difference. I
try to, but I'm a troublemaker. I annoy a lot of people, but that's
well, unfortunately, Peru, sometimes when you've got to support and break the taboo, you're always whoever they may be will always be seen as a troublemaker. So I've known you a good portion of half of my existence. I've known you, mashallah. So I know you're not a troublemaker. I've seen you to be a very, I've seen situations that you and me have been politically pushed into back in our university days, by certain people, and we resolved it quite amicably. So you're doing a wonderful job. Cool. I've got a feeling, alhamdulillah, you're gonna be rising the ranks of the Labour Party. So keep going. Don't stop. Do not stop. If you need support, you pick up the phone. I'm there. Whatever help you need, we'll rally the support. Honestly, it's very important. We need, in order to extinguish, remove inequity, right? We've got to face. We've got to do whatever it takes, Peru. If that means lobbying, if that means rallying, if that means podcasts, if that means writing a book, if that means having a debate, it doesn't matter. Inequity has to be challenged face on. Otherwise, there is no equilibrium. And when there is no equilibrium, you only have, and I'm sorry, but it's a travesty of justice.
Okay, but thank you again, Jahangir. Yeah, and let's keep in touch and send me the docs, and I'll actually put them up. So inshallah, I'll try to get the video out tonight. So I've got a lot of editing, and what I'll do is I'll send you the links, and we'll take it from there, bruv. But thank you again, and let's keep in touch, as they say.
Yeah, and Pru, just please, is it still being recorded?
No, let me just switch it off. Just one moment. Let me just.